Hello, biology students, and welcome back to another audio recording. Today we're going to focus on Chapter 5 on populations. So we've begun our third unit on populations, and today I'm going to be reading through Chapter 5, Section 1. So remember to be following along on that Section 5, Part 1 reading guide as you complete this. Here is the reading guide right here. So you're going to go ahead and fill this out as I read through. So let's go ahead and get started with this reading. So feel free to read about the inquiry activity. I'm going to go ahead and skip over that and get started. Chapter 5, Section 1. How do populations grow? Sea otters are important members of the kelp forest community of America's Pacific Northwest coast. This forest is made up of algae called giant kelp, with stalks up to 30 meters long, and smaller types of kelp. The kelp forest provides a habitat for a variety of animals. Sea otters need a lot of energy to stay warm in cold water, so they eat large quantities of their favorite food, sea urchins. Sea urchins, in turn, feed on kelp. The relationships along this food chain set the stage for a classic tale of population growth and decline. A century ago, otters were nearly eliminated by hunting. Sea urchin populations increased greatly, and kelp forests nearly disappeared. Why? Because the kelp was eaten down to the bare rock by hordes of sea urchins. The future of the kelp forests looked grim. Then, sea otters were declared an endangered species and were protected from hunting. With hunters out of the picture, otter populations recovered. Sea urchin numbers dropped dramatically. Kelp grew back. But now some otter populations are shrinking again because otters are being killed or being eaten by killer whales. To better understand why populations such as these change as they do, we turn to the study of population biology. Characteristics of populations. Several terms can be used to describe a population in nature. Three important characteristics of a population are its geographic distribution, density, and growth rate. A fourth characteristic, the population's age structure, will be discussed later in this chapter. Geographic distribution, or range, is a term that describes the area inhabited by a population. The range can vary in size from a few cubic centimeters occupied by bacteria in a rotting apple to the millions of square kilometers occupied by migrating whales in the Pacific Ocean. Population density is the number of individuals per unit area. This number can vary tremendously depending on the species and its ecosystem. The population of saguaro cactus in the desert plant community shown in Figure 5.1, for example, has a low density, whereas other plants in that community have a relatively high density. Figure 5.1. The tall saguaro cactuses in this Arizona desert have a low population density compared to the smaller desert plants. Density is one of the main characteristics that describe a natural population. Other characteristics of populations are their geographic distribution and growth rate. Population growth. Natural populations may stay the same size from year to year, but a population can grow rapidly, as sea otter populations did when they were first protected from hunting. Populations can also decrease in size, as otter populations are doing now, because of predation by killer whales. But just how do interacting factors such as these influence population growth? Three factors can affect population size: the number of births, the number of deaths, and the number of individuals that enter or leave the population. Simply put, a population will increase or decrease in size depending on how many individuals are added to it or removed from it. Generally, populations grow if more individuals are born than die in any period of time. For some organisms, such as the penguins in Figure 5.2, being born may actually mean hatching. Plants can add new individuals as seeds sprout and begin to grow. A population can grow when its birth rate is greater than its death rate. If the birth rate equals the death rate, the population stays more or less the same size. If the death rate is greater than the birth rate, the population shrinks. Sea otter populations grew when hunting stopped because their death rate dropped. Those same otter populations are shrinking now because killer whales have raised the death rate of otters again. Immigration, the movement of individuals into an area, is another factor that can cause a population to grow. Emigration, the movement of individuals out of an area, can cause a population to decrease in size. Wildlife biologists studying changes in populations of animals, such as grizzly bears and wolves, must consider immigration and emigration. For example, immigration can occur when young animals approaching maturity leave the area where they were born, find mates, and establish new territories. A shortage of food in one area may also lead to emigration. On the other hand, populations can increase by immigration as animals in search of mates or food arrive from outside. Figure 5.2. This king penguin population has grown in size due to the recent births of chicks, recognizable by their downy brown feathers. Population size is affected by the number of births, the number of deaths, and the number of individuals that enter or leave the population. Exponential growth. If a population has abundant space and food and is protected from predators and disease, then organisms in that population will multiply and the population size will increase. Let's conduct an imaginary investigation to understand how growth under ideal conditions might occur. Suppose you put a single bacterium in a petri dish. Supply it with enough nutrients and incubate the culture with the right amount of heat, moisture, and light. How will the population change over time? Bacteria reproduce by splitting in half. If the bacteria have a doubling time of 20 minutes, then within 20 minutes, the first bacterium will divide to produce 2 bacteria. 20 minutes later, the 2 bacteria will divide to produce 4. After another 20 minutes, there will be 8 bacteria. In another hour, there will be 64 bacteria. And in just one more hour, there will be 512. And in just one day, this colony of bacteria will grow to an astounding size of, that's like 4.7, really big number, a lot of zeros. I don't exactly know what that number is. What would happen if this growth pattern continued for several days without slowing down? Bacteria would cover the planet. Figure 5.3 shows a graph with the size of the bacterial population plotted against time. As you can see, the pattern of growth is a J-shaped curve. The J-shaped curve indicates that the population is undergoing exponential growth. Exponential growth occurs when the individuals in a population reproduce at a constant rate. At first, the number of individuals in an exponentially growing population increases slowly. Over time, however, the population becomes larger and larger until it approaches an infinitely large size. Under ideal conditions, with unlimited resources, a population will grow exponentially. Figure 5.3. In the presence of unlimited resources and in the absence of predation and disease, a population will grow exponentially. Both of these hypothetical graphs show the characteristic J shape of exponential population growth. With a doubling time of 20 minutes, some bacteria have the fastest rates of reproduction among living things. Populations of other species grow more slowly. For example, a female elephant can produce an infant only every 2 to 4 years. And then the offspring take about 10 years to mature. But as you can see in figure 5.3, In the unlikely event that all the offspring of a single pair of elephants survived and reproduced for 750 years, there would be nearly 20 million elephants. Logistic growth. Obviously, neither bacteria nor elephants cover the planet. This means that exponential growth does not continue in natural populations for very long. What might cause population growth to stop or slow down? Growth slows down. Suppose that a few animals are introduced into a new environment. At first, as the animals begin to reproduce, the population increases slowly. Then, because resources are unlimited, the population grows exponentially. In time, however, the rate of population growth begins to slow down. This does not mean that the size of the population has dropped. The population is still growing, but at a much slower rate. As resources become less available, the growth of a population slows or stops. The general S-shaped curve of this growth pattern, called logistic growth, is shown in Figure 5.4 in a yeast population. Logistic growth occurs when a population's growth slows or stops following a period of exponential growth. How might this happen? Population growth may slow down when the birth rate decreases, when the death rate increases, or when both events occur at the same time. Similarly, population growth may slow down when the rate of immigration decreases, the rate of emigration increases, or both. When the birth rate and death rate are the same, or when the rate of immigration is equal to the rate of emigration, then population growth will slow down or even stop for a time. Note that even when the population growth is said to stop, the population is still rising and falling somewhat, but the ups and downs average out around a certain population size. Figure 5.4. This graph shows the S-shaped curve of logistic growth. As resources become less available, the population growth rate slows or stops. The growth of this population has leveled off at its carrying capacity. So notice here's that oscillation, that up and down around the carrying capacity. Carrying capacity. If you look again at Figure 5.4, you will see a horizontal line through the region of the graph where the growth of the yeast population has leveled off. The point at which that line intersects the y-axis tells you the size of the population when the average growth rate reaches 0. That number, in turn, represents the largest number of individuals, in this case yeast cells, that a given environment can support. Ecologists call this number the carrying capacity of the environment for a particular species. If you examine natural populations of familiar plant and animal species, you will find that many of them follow a logistic growth curve. In the natural world, there are many factors that can slow the growth of a population. The factors that limit population growth are discussed in the next section. All right, folks, and that will wrap up section 5.1. Make sure you complete that reading guide and have a wonderful day.